Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin Parshas Behar, chapter 25, verse 1. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe b'Har Sinai lemor. Hashem said to Moshe on Har Sinai, and he told him, saying, verse 2, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'martu aliyem. Speak to the Jewish people and tell them, Ki savo el aretz asher ani nosein lachem. When you come into the land that I give you, the land of Israel, v'shavsa haaretz shabos l'Hashem, and the earth will take a period of rest in honor of God. And the Torah goes on to describe the mitzvah of Shemitah, which of course we're in a Shemitah year right now. It's not that applicable for us here in the diaspora, but in Israel, it's extremely applicable in all kinds of ways. And that's the mitzvah that we begin with the parsha with. Now, there are two words in the opening verse of the parsha that really jump out. Behar Sinai, that God said this to Moshe at Har Sinai. God told Moshe a lot of things at Har Sinai. Why would the Torah specify that these things were said at Har Sinai? The phrasing, the rest of Pasuk is extremely normal. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, we have left and right in the Torah. But the emphasis that this mitzvah was conveyed at Har Sinai, why? Is there something special about this mitzvah? Is this to the exclusion of other mitzvahs? How are we to understand this phrase? So there's a lengthy Ramban over here. Ramban and Pasuk Aleph. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe b'Har Sinai. Ma inyan Shemitah lahar Sinai. So he starts off by quoting Rashi, a very, very famous quote. This is more or less the Talmudic equivalent of what does that have to do with the price of tea in China, though it's not identical, but that's used in all kinds of ways. But the question is a very basic question. What is the fundamental connection between the mitzvah of Shemitah and the fact that it was imparted at Har Sinai? V'alo nemru kol ha-mitzvos m'Sinai. All of the commandments were given from Sinai. So now Rashi cites the answer. Elama Shemitah nemru klaloseo protea v'diktukea m'Sinai. Just like all of the details of Shemitah were imparted at Har Sinai, Avkulo nemru klalosea uprotea v'diktukea m'Sinai. So too, every other mitzvah in the Torah, all aspects of the mitzvah were conveyed at Har Sinai. You might have thought that when we say God taught Moshe the Torah at Har Sinai, it meant like an executive summary, maybe an outline, maybe just sort of like general statements about each mitzvah. No, the same way that all of these details God now imparts to Moshe, and it's all under the rubric of being at Har Sinai, it's that way for every other mitzvah in the Torah. V'nira li shekach perusho. This is still Rashi speaking, and I think what's meant by this medrash, v'shalom tzinu shmitas karkos shenishnes ba'arvos moav. Now, I mean, how do I know that all the aspects of Shemitah were taught at Har Sinai more so than other mitzvos, or that it's more evident than other mitzvos? So Rashi points out that in Sefer Devarim, there's nothing new that's imparted in the book of Devarim about the mitzvah of Shemitah. There are many, many mitzvos that there's something new imparted when Moshe reviews things with the Jewish people. And that's not the case for Shemitah. Lamadu, we learned from that, sheklalosea uprotea kula nemru m'Sinai. Oh, so that means that every single detail that the Torah teaches us about Shemitah were all imparted at Har Sinai. Uboa kasu v'limed kan al kol dibur shenidbar l'Moshe b'Sinai. So basically, the reason why the Torah would specify Shemitah to teach this lesson that all the details were taught at Sinai is Shemitah happens to be an example of a mitzvah that there's no additional nuances taught in the book of Devarim. And so therefore, it's very apparent that this is everything that the Torah told me that God imparted to Moshe about it. And so therefore, by opening the phrase with Har Sinai, that emphasizes the same way that all of these details were taught at Har Sinai, so too for all of the mitzvahs. Says the Ramban, ve'enu nachon ve'enai klal. I don't think this is correct at all. I do not think this is remotely the correct shot. Shaharbe mitzvos kishmita shalom nishnu ba'arvos moav. There's plenty of mitzvos in the Torah that there's no additional nuances taught in the book of Devarim. V'neida bohen shenemru klalosei and proteim m'Sinai obo moed. There's plenty of mitzvahs that we could say that about, that obviously everything was taught, whether it be at Har Sinai, whether it be in the tent of meeting. V'od, minayin shehukshu shara dibro shenishnu ba'arvos moav l'shmita. V'lohoyu klolosem b'Sinai proteim ba'arvos Moav. V'chein hayaroi Yoseh lomar ki hanishnos nishnu levar proteim. Kilo nemru b'Sinai ela klolosea. Then, so the Ramban says, first of all, I don't understand. It's not like Shemitah is the only mitzvah that fits that bill, that there's no further explanation given in Sefer Dvarim. Question number one. Question number two. Who says that I'm supposed to extrapolate from that all the mitzvos, even those mitzvos that there is some nuance taught in Dvarim, that everything was taught at Har Sinai? Maybe this is the point. Maybe specifically Shemitah, everything was taught at Sinai, but mitzvos that there's more things taught in the book of Dvarim. Obviously, there were more things taught after Sinai. So the Ramban says, I don't begin to understand what this is all about. But the Brisa that's cited in Torah's Kohanim, the explanation is clear of it. Shashmita nemru klaloseh misinai dichsiv beparshas ve'ela mishpatim ba'ashviyis tishbetenu tashta v'achlu avyonei amecha ve'elu dinei hashmita b'derech klal. Says Ramban, citing a Brisa, that in the Parsha of Mishpatim, that is right in the zone there of the mitzvahs that were clearly imparted at Sinai, the Torah talks about Shemitah. Ubekan, and then here, Chazar v'Amar ki b'Har Sinai od nemru kol pratea sharei kulam niskar b'Parsha Azos. So not only did the Torah introduce Shemitah in the context of Har Sinai as evidence in Parsha Mishpatim, the Torah adds things now about Shemitah, and between these two parshas, that's everything the Torah, in the entire Torah that's said about Shemitah. And by emphasizing here that it's Har Sinai, that teaches that everything about Shemitah was taught at Har Sinai. And therefore, what would be unique about Har Sinai, about Shemitah, is the fact that there was a discussion of Shemitah in the parsha adjacent to the discussion of Har Sinai, and the discussion of Shemitah in a later parsha. So I might have thought, oh, that must have been the stuff taught at Har Sinai, and this God discussed with Moshe at a later juncture. And the Torah clarifies, no, these additional points were also taught at Har Sinai. Oh, so this is a unique thing about Shemitah, and from this I learned that all these other mitzvahs are the same way, that everything about the mitzvahs were taught at Har Sinai. And by the way, much later in this parsha, it says, these are the commandments which God instructed Moshe to convey to the Jewish people at Har Sinai. And it didn't just say, this is the commandments, it says, these are the commandments. Lahakish kol ha-mitzvos el ha-shmita nizkeres. That connects all other mitzvos to the specific lesson of Shemitah. That teaches that all the mitzvahs of the Torah, all the details were conveyed at Har Sinai. And there's an interesting midrashic comment that when it says at the end of this parsha, these are the mitzvos, that nobody else no Navi can come and claim, I have a new commandment from God. Navis can claim God gave them a directive, God imparted a message to Jewish people, but no Navi can come and say, I now have mitzvah number 614, because all of the mitzvahs were taught at Har Sinai. Asher tzivu Hashem es Moshe, kedai ashliach l'sholto. Okay. And then what happened in the book of Dvarim is Moshe is just instructed, in the plains of Moab, is Moshe is instructed to convey additional points. The Inyan Parsha Azos, Moshe is instructed to convey additional clarification to the people. V'inyan Parsha Azos shenichtav b'kan, Amar Reb Avram, kizos habris aksuva b'parshas Eila Mishpatim, ukshekiblu al nafsham nasa v'nishma, az nichrasu abris, v'yomer lohen kol ha-parsha Azos. So now the Ramban, as we've had him discuss in other places, now the Ramban gets into sort of the brass tacks of things. So let's talk about the timeline. What's going on with this parsha? If it was imparted at Har Sinai, what exactly is it doing here? So the Ibn Ezra explains that when the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do when we listen to the commandments of God, that's a covenant on all of the commandments. These kira, and At this juncture, we lay out this set of commandments. L'chaber t'noi ha'aretz, ki kasher amar al ha'aroyos, ki bavuram takios ha'aretz, kain amar b'parshas imchukosai al shabsos ha'aretz, v'chutzrach t'chila lahazkir ha'shabbosos. We are going to have in next week's parsha Tochacha, harsh words of rebuke from God. And one of the classic phrases in the Tochacha is, not then, when the Jewish people are exiled, the land will mark its Shemitah years, its years of rest. And this is the famous idea that one of the great causes for the exile of the Jewish people from the land of Israel is they didn't appropriately observe the laws of Shemitah. So this parsha is placed here because it's a lead-in to the Tochacha, to the rebuke, because it just makes sense. If there's such an emphasis on the importance of observing the Shemitah laws, if there's such an emphasis on that, then it only makes sense that we should introduce the Shemitah laws right before we get into the Tochacha. Ulafidati, and that's how the Ibn Ezra explains it. Ulafidati, ki nichtav akan b'seder Nachum. Ramban says, I think it makes a lot of sense how it's written here. Ki perish Behar Sinai, ba'aloso sham, lekabel luchos shnios. Now the Ramban brings in a whole new aspect. When we say that God imparted this to Moshe at Har Sinai, when did God impart this to Moshe at Har Sinai? Moshe has had various periods of time that he went to the top of Har Sinai for. So up until now, we've been assuming, this is when God taught Moshe all of the Torah, which presumably was that first 40 days. And then at the end of the 40 days, Moshe comes down and he finds the Jewish people serve the golden calf, etc. Says the Ramban, no, these psukim here were imparted to Moshe when it was time to accept the second luchos, the second tablets. And so now this is sort of like some type of new review of things. This, of course, requires explanation. We will continue in the Ramban tomorrow. We're about halfway through this Ramban. So what we discussed today is the Ramban's discussion regarding, and the contrast between the Ramban's Pshat and Rashi's Pshat. Though the punchline is the same, but sort of how we got to the punchline is very different between Rashi and the Ramban. I have to correct myself. I kept on talking about Sefer Dvarim. Excuse me, I should have been speaking about Sefer Bamidbar. I'm very sorry. With the additional explanations, I should have been talking about Sefer Bamidbar. Sorry about that. Okay, so